Jen Psaki Sayed, "You're not qualified," Kennedy's comeback went viral. The tension was already thick in the CNN green room, a space usually buzzing with the low hum of makeup artists and hurried producers. But tonight, it felt like a pressure cooker ready to blow. Two names were scrawled on the door, in Sharpie: Jen Psaki and John Neely Kennedy. This wasn't set up as some polite chat about policy nuances. No, the network had hyped it as a generational showdown, pitting seasoned experience against raw energy, established legacy against building momentum. Kennedy sat there in silence, flipping through his notes, with the steady focus of a man who'd been through enough battles to know rehearsal wasn't always necessary. The facts were locked in his mind, his message crystal clear, honed from years of standing up for what he believed in. The only wild card was Psaki's approach. Would she come out swinging with facts, or try to disarm with that polished charm she'd perfected over the years? Psaki strolled in just 5 minutes before they went live. Her trademark calm smile firmly in place, the kind that had dodged and deflected 1,000 tough questions back in her White House days. But this evening, she wasn't safely behind a podium fielding queries from the press corps. She was about to sit face-to-face with someone who had zero intention of yielding an inch. "You know," Psaki said casually, taking a sip from her paper cup, as if they were old pals catching up, "I admire your ambition. I was ambitious once too. But trust me, this isn't as easy as you think. You've still got a lot to learn." Kennedy glanced up, completely unfazed, his southern drawl carrying a hint of amusement, but no give. "Good thing I learned fast," he replied, his eyes steady, not breaking contact. Psaki smirked, but there was a narrowing in her eyes, a subtle tell that she hadn't expected such quick composure. The moderator knocked lightly on the door, then his voice muffled but urgent. 5 minutes, folks." They were escorted to the stage amid the growing buzz from the audience, a mix of journalists scribbling notes, students wide-eyed with excitement, strategists leaning forward in their seats, and a handful of political influencers already poised with their phones to capture every viral-worthy second for social media. Camera operators adjusted their lenses with precision, producers whispered frantically behind the thick glass of the control room. This wasn't just another segment on the evening lineup. It was primed to be pure combat, the kind that could shift conversations overnight. The studio lights flared hot, casting sharp shadows across the set, and the floor manager held up his hand, counting down silently, 3 fingers, 2, 1. "Welcome to the exchange." The moderator intoned his voice smooth and professional. Tonight, a conversation between former White House press secretary Jen Psaki and current conservative voice Senator John Neely Kennedy. Let's begin. But Psaki didn't wait for any formal cue. She leaned in right away, her voice firm and direct. "Kennedy, you've got spunk, I'll give you that. But spunk doesn't equal qualification. And frankly, you're not qualified to speak on behalf of this generation or this country." A collective gasp rippled through the studio, a few phones lighting up instantly as audience members started typing furiously. Kennedy didn't flinch, didn't even shift in his seat. His eyes locked onto Psaki's with the unyielding steadiness of someone who'd been underestimated plenty of times before and had turned it into fuel. This time, he was more than ready. For a brief moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the overhead lights hanging like a suspended breath over the room. Kennedy didn't rush his response. He let the weight of her words hang there. Didn't glance at the moderator for backup or scan the crowd for nods of approval. Instead, he simply folded his hands on the table, leaned in just a touch, and spoke with an unnerving composure that cut through the tension like a knife. "You know, Jen," he began, his tone even almost conversational, "I wasn't surprised you'd go there. When folks like me step up with real conviction, establishment types like you pull out that same old playbook, belittle, dismiss, and hide behind experience like it's some unbreakable shield from accountability. A subtle ripple spread through the audience, murmurs starting to build as heads turned toward each other. Psaki blinked clearly, caught off guard by the calm sharpness in his voice, the way it didn't rise in anger, but drilled down with precision. I may have my own path. Kennedy continued his words, gaining a deeper, more grounded focus. But I've spent years fighting for Americans in campaigns, in press rooms, and out on the ground where it matters most. I've seen the real-world impact of policies you only ever defended from behind a podium. The moderator raised an eyebrow, sensing the shift, but he stayed quiet, wisely, letting the moment unfold. Kennedy's voice didn't escalate. If anything, it sank lower, more intent, drawing everyone in. You say I'm not qualified. He turned directly to Psaki now, his gaze unwavering. Well, I don't need your permission to speak for this generation. I've lived the promises and the challenges firsthand. My generation values hard work, clear thinking, and standing up for what's right. You think being qualified means schmoozing at DC cocktail parties? I think it means being unafraid to tell the truth no matter who it rattles. Applause broke out. Then, not the wild, raucous kind, but sharp and purposeful, like a punctuation mark on his words. Jen shifted slightly in her seat, her posture adjusting as if to brace herself. But Kennedy wasn't finished. He pressed on with that same measured intensity. You left your post with those polished press clips and TV deals lining up. I stay in the fight because of conviction, real dangerous conviction. That last word landed like a solid punch, echoing in the quiet that followed. Viewers at home were already clipping the segment, fingers flying over screens, and on X, a new hashtag sparked to life, #qualifiedenough. People reposted the clip with captions like, "He just said what we've all been waiting to hear." Back on set, Psaki tried to steady herself, her lips tightening as she prepared to push back. Well, she said, her voice controlled, but edged, if you think passion equals insight, that says a lot. Kennedy tilted his head just a fraction, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. No, Jen. What says a lot is who's still listening after you stop talking. The exchange had only just begun, but already the air in the studio felt charged, the initial tension morphing into something electric, a prelude to the deeper shifts yet to come. Psaki straightened her back, her face settling into that controlled calm she'd mastered during her White House tenure, the one that had seen her through hostile reporters and high-stakes briefings. She'd been the go-to spin doctor for a polished operation, knowing exactly how to recover from a hit, or so she thought. Let's take a step back, Psaki said, flashing a small, practiced smile designed to dial down the heat. I'm not here to attack you, Kennedy. I just think the stakes are too high to pretend credentials don't matter. You're a passionate communicator, sure, but passion alone doesn't tackle complex problems. Policy is hard work, and governing isn't about putting on a show. She leaned into the table, weaving her next words carefully. America needs more than catchy sound bites. It needs real substance. And frankly, when you boil everything down to outrage, you miss the nuance, and that's when the country suffers. The studio quieted again, her move a classic one, cool, the room position herself as the mature voice reclaimed the high ground of intellect. But Kennedy wasn't bound by those DC unwritten rules. He paused for a beat, then another, letting her words settle, before responding, his tone so measured and scalpel-sharp that it almost came across as gentle until the meaning hit. You talk about nuance, Jen, but where was that nuance when important issues got simplified in those briefings? Psaki's expression froze for a split second. Kennedy leaned forward just a bit. Where was the complexity when key decisions touched everyday lives? The audience started murmuring, a low wave building. Psaki opened her mouth to interject, but Kennedy kept the rhythm, not letting her break in. And where was the substance when promises came? Without the full picture. The moderator leaned back in his chair, realizing this wasn't a standard back and forth anymore. It was turning into a reckoning. Kennedy pivoted slightly, addressing the audience directly now, instead of Psaki. We've had decades of slick messaging and panels of experts. What has it really given us folks calling things complicated when they're just in need of straightforward fixes and thoughtful leadership? The crowd erupted then, not just with applause, but with genuine energy cheers, rising momentum, building like a wave. Psaki's mouth parted as if to respond, but it was evident she wasn't just losing ground in the debate. She was losing the room's attention. The moderator, picking up on the palpable shift, cleared his throat and jumped in. "Let's refocus for a moment," he said, glancing between them. "Kennedy, you've laid out your criticisms, but what would you do differently? And how does your background qualify you to guide those choices?" It was the sort of question crafted to probe for depth, a trap for anyone who might seem light on substance. But Kennedy didn't hesitate. He drew a quiet breath and did the unexpected. He spoke from the heart, plain and true. "I grew up in a small town in Louisiana," he said, looking straight into the camera, as if addressing folks back home. "We were in that in-between spot, where hard work meant survival and leaning on your community. My folks taught me the value of showing up every day, no excuses." The audience hushed completely, hanging on his words. Kennedy's voice held steady, his eyes reflecting a genuine shimmer. "So when I speak up today, it's not from some policy memo or think tank internship. It's because I remember where I came from and why I'll never forget it. The grit, the honesty, the real talk that gets things done." A single clap echoed out. Then another building into a room-filling eruption, not partisan hollering, but a wave of human connection. Psaki glanced at the moderator, her look almost pleading for intervention, but there was no stopping it. In that instant, Kennedy wasn't debating. He was bearing witness to something bigger, setting the stage for the truths that would unfold. As the chapter of this exchange began to close on its opening act, the air crackled with anticipation, the initial clash giving way to a deeper current, one where Kennedy's conviction started to carve out a path, hinting at the values that would define not just the night, but the conversation's core. Psaki shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her fingers reaching for the glass of water on the table. A subtle tell that her carefully built poise was starting to crack under the pressure. For just a split second, the studio audience caught a glimpse of something rare from the former press secretary: hesitation, but she snapped back quickly, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Kennedy," she started, her tone laced with that practiced warmth she'd used so many times before. "Your personal story is compelling, I'll admit that, but policy isn't about emotion or anecdotes. It requires a deep understanding of complexity. Geopolitics, economics, healthcare systems, they're intertwined in ways that demand more than just small-town experience to navigate. With all due respect, growing up with a snowplow or a school aide's perspective doesn't automatically make you a policymaker." It was a slick move, a calculated insult wrapped in the guise of a compliment designed to pivot the conversation back to her strengths while undermining his authenticity. But Kennedy saw right through it. He didn't blink, didn't let his expression waver, just held her gaze with that steady Southern resolve. "Interesting," he replied, his voice cool and even, like he was chatting over coffee rather than dismantling an argument on national TV, "because I recall certain press statements that tried to frame everyday challenges as signs of broader progress, brushing off real struggles as temporary. That was part of your role, right?" The audience let out an uneasy chuckle, the kind that ripples when someone hits a nerve without raising their voice. Psaki's smile strained at the edges, but Kennedy didn't let up, his words flowing with purpose, not volume. You keep talking about complexity, Jen, but let's get real about results. When decisions lead to folks having to choose between basics, like heating their homes or putting food on the table, that's not some abstract theory. That's the hard reality hitting families every day. Psaki tried to jump in her hand, gesturing as if to reclaim the floor, but Kennedy spoke a little louder, still not shouting just firm enough to hold the tempo. And how do you square that with the promises made from podiums that didn't always match the ground truth? The moderator lifted a hand, murmuring, "Let's keep it on track." But Kennedy shook his head slightly, his eyes locking back on Psaki. "No, this is the heart of it, Jen. You want to drill down on qualifications, fine. Let's do that." With a smooth motion, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded printed report, sliding it across the polished table toward the moderator, who picked it up with a curious glance. "This here's a Department of Education breakdown," Kennedy explained, his drawl adding a layer of folksy authority, showing how extended school closures hit minority and low-income kids the hardest, not the ones with fancy tutors or stable setups, but the everyday families who rely on those institutions to give their children a fair shot. Gasps echoed through the studio, a wave of surprise as heads craned forward, and Psaki's eyes darted down to the paper, clearly thrown off her game. Kennedy leaned in a touch, his voice dropping to that grounded depth again. "You were in the room when some of these calls were made, Jen. You stood up there and communicated them to the American people, framing them as necessary steps. So don't come at me questioning my qualifications to talk policy when you were front and center explaining those very outcomes." The room didn't erupt in noise this time. Instead, a heavier kind of reckoning settled, in the sort where people lean in closer, processing the weight of the words. Phones buzzed with notifications as clips started flying across social media hashtags like Kennedy vs. Psaki trending upward, and even moderates online murmuring that he'd just delivered a point too solid to dismiss. Psaki leaned back, her eyes not flashing anger anymore, but a flicker of worry. This wasn't a fleeting viral blip. It was a full narrative shift happening live. By the commercial break, the moderator's earpiece was alive with chatter producers scrambling in the control room, network higher-ups, firing off urgent texts about the unexpected tilt. Viewers at home edged closer to their screens, sensing this was more than scripted drama. It was unfiltered truth breaking through. Jen sat there stiffly fiddling with her posture. Her once commanding presence dimmed, because managing narratives from a briefing room was one thing, but facing this unyielding clarity head-on in real time was another. The studio audience, who'd started out with polite neutrality, now showed subtle signs of sway nods, here quiet murmurs, there exchanged glances that spoke volumes without words. The change wasn't about sides, it was emotional, a connection forming around Kennedy's straightforward delivery. As the show clicked back on, his voice sliced through the resuming hum. "You know what I reckon scares folks like you, Jen?" he said calmly. No hint of accusation, just observation. "It's not my different take. It's that I'm not fazed by being underestimated." Psaki tried to cut in. "That's not." But Kennedy rolled on smoothly. "You figure defending the status quo means sticking to decorum. I say people are hungry for straight talk that cuts through the noise." Boom! The audience responded not with claps, but a deep guttural affirmation, the kind that comes from the core. Kennedy turned to the cameras, addressing the viewers directly. "Folks watching at home, you've been told time and again you're not sharp enough to question things, that your everyday concerns don't fit the big picture. I'm telling you flat out, that's bunk. I don't speak for a label. I speak for the quiet ones ready to be heard. The moderator sat there momentarily speechless while Psaki crossed her arms scrambling for composure. You can toss slogans all night, Kennedy, she shot back. But this ain't a stump speech, it's a debate. He met her eyes, calm as ever. Nah, Jen, it's a wake-up call. Hashtags exploded online. Hash. Wake-up call. Kennedy claps back. Psaki looking stunned in freeze frames. News banners flashed. Kennedy takes command on debate stage. Psaki plays defense. Split screens on rival networks captured the moment her once signature circle back poise. Now a relic. In the CNN control room, a producer muttered, "He's flipped this thing in under 20 minutes." In the lobby, an ex-advisor whispered, "We picked the wrong one to underestimate." Behind the scenes, the media machine revved up producers, whispering urgently into earpieces, to pivot topics, anything to douse the fire Kennedy had lit. Media voices hit socials with spin. Kennedy's got charisma. But populism ain't policy. Don't mix viral hits with real leadership. But it didn't land because this wasn't about loudness. It was clarity delivered without notes backed by reports rooted in real stories, pointing out gaps, not with rage, but reason. In other network green rooms, anchors watched jaws clenched. One producer grumbled, "He's reduced her to sound bites." Back in the studio, Psaki pushed forward, arms crossed tone, soft but edged. "You lean on your background like it's the ace in every hand, but we're here for policy, not hardship tales." Kennedy let the silence stretch, then replied evenly, "I bring it up, Jen, 'cause policymakers often lose sight of who feels the pinch." The audience hummed in agreement, nods rippling. "You say stories don't count. That's the rub you treat, governing like theory. I see it as personal, 'cause for millions policy means scraping by or getting ahead." Psaki exhaled sharp. "I ain't dismissing pain." Kennedy leaned in. "But explaining it away, that's tougher on folks." That sealed it. Jen realized she couldn't outmaneuver him tonight. He wasn't arguing points, he was reshaping perspectives. Outside, crowds gathered phones, up murmurs of, "He gets us, we matter." Tweets flew. Psaki talks DC, Kennedy talks real America. The exec tapped his desk. This ratings gold's turned into a mirror. And it wasn't done. Foreign policy loomed, Kennedy ready not just to hold ground, but to redefine it. The moderator inhaled, deep steering to calmer waters, the domestic heat leaving Psaki reeling producers itching for her rebound. "Let's shift to foreign policy, Senator Kennedy. Critics say your views oversimplify America's global role, that isolationist tones and strongman nods don't safeguard democracy." Your take, Kennedy eased back words, unhurried sharp. "Americans are weary of vague global stances that drain without clear wins." Pause for breath. Take Afghanistan. The pullout mishandled. So bad lives lost gear, abandoned allies, stranded. Psaki tensed. You defended it as success via evacuations, Jen glossing over the trapped, the grieving families. She raised a hand. Unfair. His eyes held. Unfair's dodging accountability by calling it complex labeling questioners unqualified. The room tightened, audience rapt. Kennedy pressed, on Ukraine nuance sure, but how much aid oversight? Why foot Europe's bill, while home fronts lag? Psaki parted lips, but he turned to moderator. I back strength over muddle peace via deterrence. America first, not fear, but earned leadership. Silence from both. Backstage texts flew, spiraling outflanked. Reddit buzzed, circling Psaki. UK posts, composed voice. The steadfast one. Kennedy breathed, final foreign policy. Protect America, always lead unapologetically. Psaki stunned her polish. No shield. Kennedy claimed, not crowd, but voiceless mantle. The panel transcended flashpoint of narratives versus frustration. Psaki's still voice smothered by truth. Moderator Ms. Psaki respond. She inhaled, complex times, tough calls, mistakes, but Kennedy cut, no accountability. That's it, Jen. Your era dodges by complexity. Americans pay with sweat. Stillness. He geared up. You deflect, delay, dilute, but I know the game unafraid to torch it. She opened he. Forward, mocked me, pre-air ambitious, much to learn, not encouragement containment. Can't bottle momentum. Quiet calm. Confidence as arrogance. Conviction as green, fed up millions, as misguided, not leadership. To audience, that's fear. Gasps, her smirk gone outmatched. Chaos control, momentum transfer. Social relentless, dismantled doctrine. He dropped not qualified truth, no credential needed for truth, no approval for voice, no permission to win. Historic silence. Pan out awe, Kennedy underdog to voice. Moderator rattled lively, unexpected. Psaki nodded. Thin faded. Kennedy, tall, certain, not sound bites, truth millions think tired of quiet. Respect, service, but without results. Theater, future to truth, over polish, clarity over credentials, facts. Conviction, courage, no prompter. Eruption, affirmation. He rose, nodded, walked off. Staffer, generational shift, not her favor. Social, detonated, redefined it. Hatch. Not qualified, more than last five combined. Steamrolled with spine. Midnight trends, top clips circulated. Students, vets, parents, moderates. He gets it. Psaki canceled interview statement. Message stands, narrative slipped. Microphone pass. Kennedy phone buzzed. Next reply. Change story. He did from not qualified to awakening. Clash, arrogance, accountability. Experience versus conviction. Conviction won. Voice to mocked message. Underestimated, woken. Victory, bigger, beginning. The moderator took a deep breath, his notes crinkling slightly under his fingers as he tried to steer the conversation toward what he hoped would be more even ground. The intensity from the domestic policy back and forth had left Psaki visibly on the defensive, and the producers were buzzing in his earpiece, desperate for a topic that might let her reclaim some footing and balance the segment. "All right," he said, glancing down at his cue cards with a measured tone, "let's turn our attention to foreign policy. Mr. Kennedy, some observers have suggested your perspectives on America's role in the world can come across as overly straightforward, arguing that certain rhetorical approaches might not fully protect broader interests. What's your response to that?" Kennedy leaned back in his chair, composed as ever, not rushing into his words but letting them unfold with that deliberate Southern cadence that drew listeners in. He didn't fidget or glance around. His focus stayed sharp, his voice lower now, measured, but still carrying that underlying edge. "Well, I think what everyday Americans are getting tired of," he began, "is these unclear strategies in global affairs that seem to drag on without a clear path or purpose. Folks want approaches that prioritize our security and prosperity right here at home, without getting tangled in endless commitments that don't add up. He paused just long enough for the silence to underscore his point, letting it breathe in the room. Psaki, sensing an opening, straightened up a bit, her expression shifting back toward that professional assurance she'd built her career on. She nodded slightly as if agreeing on the surface, but her words came out with a pointed edge. "I appreciate the sentiment, Kennedy, but international relations aren't black and white. They're layered with alliances, economic ties, and long-term strategies that require nuance to maintain stability. Oversimplifying can risk isolating us from key partners." It was her attempt to pivot, to sound like the voice of seasoned reason, but Kennedy didn't let it slide unchallenged. He pressed forward smoothly, his tone steady and logical. "Let's talk about some real examples then, like the way we've handled withdrawals in volatile regions. Take Afghanistan. The execution there was so mishandled that it left service members in harm's way, equipment scattered, and allies scrambling. Lives were lost unnecessarily, and families back home are still grappling with that." Psaki stiffened in her seat, her calm facade holding, but her eyes narrowing just a fraction. Kennedy continued, not raising his voice, but building his case with clear step-by-step reasoning. "You were up there defending it, Jen, framing the evacuations as a win because thousands got out safely. But you didn't dwell on the Americans left behind or the Gold Star families waiting for straight answers." Psaki raised a hand, her voice cutting in with a defensive note. "That's not fair. Those were incredibly tough circumstances, and we did what we could in a fluid situation." But Kennedy's eyes locked onto hers, unwavering. "What's not fair, Jen, is waving away accountability by calling everything too complex to question. And it's especially not fair to brand folks like me unqualified just because we dare to ask the hard questions you might not want aired out." The room grew taut, the audience no longer just watching, but leaning in, absorbing every word with a deepening focus. Kennedy didn't stop there. He shifted gears, slightly broadening his point, with logical precision. "Now on something like Ukraine, sure there's nuance to supporting stability. But let's get specific. How much aid is the right amount? What's the oversight to make sure it's used effectively? And why are we shouldering so much of the load for European defense when our own priorities at home could use that focus?" Psaki opened her mouth to respond, but Kennedy turned toward the moderator, keeping the flow in his court. "I stand for real strength, not confusion, peace built on clear deterrence, not decisions that breed chaos, and above all, putting the American people first, not as an afterthought." The moderator fell silent, pen hovering over his notes, and Psaki sat there without an immediate comeback, the weight of his words hanging heavy. Backstage, Psaki's support team was in a frenzy, fingers flying over phones with urgent texts to friendly anchors, one even tweeting and quickly deleting a note about how the segment was spiraling and she was getting outflanked on all sides. On Reddit, clips of Kennedy's foreign policy takedown started popping up like wildfire threads titled things like "Kennedy's talking circles around Psaki." This guy's on fire, racking up upvotes by the minute. Even international media jumped in. A commentator from the UK posted online, "The most composed and straightforward voice on that American stage tonight isn't the one with the briefing room pedigree. It's the steadfast senator cutting through the fog." Inside the studio, Kennedy drew one more breath, wrapping his thoughts with a final resonant clarity. "You wanted to dive into foreign policy, Jen. Here's where I stand, plain and simple. Protect America first, always. Not out of fear of the world, but because we've earned the right to lead it with confidence and without unnecessary apologies." With that, he eased back, his expression calm and unreadable, leaving the stage feeling like he'd just planted a flag. Across the table, Psaki sat in a stunned quiet, her years of media savvy and debate prep suddenly feeling like flimsy armor against this barrage of straightforward logic. Kennedy hadn't just held his own, he'd taken the reins, turning what could have been her strong suit into a showcase for his emphasis on transparency, responsibility, and prioritizing everyday American interests. The debate no longer felt like a balanced panel. It had morphed into a cultural pivot point, highlighting the clash between polished explanations and the raw demand for clear, accountable approaches. Psaki, once the epitome of progressive media grace, now appeared unusually subdued, her responses buried under the undeniable pull of Kennedy's reasoned dominance. The moderator cleared his throat, trying to regain control and push toward closure. "Ms. Psaki, would you like to address Mr. Kennedy's points on these foreign approaches?" She drew in a slow breath, her words coming out measured but lacking their earlier punch. "Look, I served through some of the most complex global periods imaginable. We made those tough calls, and yeah, there were mistakes along the way." But Kennedy interjected, his tone flat and conclusive, not aggressive, but firm. "But no one's held to account. That's the crux of it, Jen. Your style of leadership sidesteps challenges by labeling them complicated. But regular Americans, they don't get that luxury. They bear the costs with their hard work and daily lives." The room went still, a profound hush falling as his words sank in. Then Kennedy shifted, delivering a sharper layer. "You've been at this long enough to master the deflect. The delay turning real concerns into something folks just shrug off. But you didn't figure on someone who knows those tricks and isn't scared to call them out, or even scrap the whole playbook." Psaki started to respond, but he leaned forward just enough, his voice dropping to that dangerously calm level. "You poked at me before we went live, calling me ambitious, saying, 'I've got lessons to learn.' That wasn't mentorship. That was trying to box me in, keep voices like mine in check. But you can't rein in momentum that's already building." Kennedy's tone was calm, but cutting. "You call confidence arrogance. You label strong beliefs as naive, and when regular folks are fed up, you dismiss them as out of touch. That's not leadership, Jen. That's fear dressed as caution." The room froze. Psaki's trademark smirk faded into stunned silence. In the control room, producers scrambled. One anchor whispered, "This isn't debate, it's a takeover." Social media erupted. Clips flooded in. Kennedy just dismantled the game plan. "This isn't confidence. This is command." Even neutral voices admitted Psaki looked stuck in the past. Then came the closer. "You said, 'I'm not qualified, I don't need titles to speak for the overlooked. And I definitely don't need your approval to lead.'" Silence followed, electric, unforgettable. The moderator wrapped up, visibly shaken. Psaki gave a stiff nod, her edge gone. Kennedy, steady finished. "I came to echo the silence. Not trade jabs. Service without results is theater, and people are done being the audience." To the camera, the future belongs to those who choose truth over gloss. Tonight proved belief, and guts don't need permission. Applause rolled in solid and real. Kennedy left not just respected, but followed. One staffer whispered, "That wasn't a win. That was a turning point." By midnight, he was trending. Not qualified became most qualified. Students, veterans, parents, all echoed. He said, "What we feel." Psaki canceled her next appearance. Kennedy. He just texted back, not playing roles, changing narratives. And he had. As the debate concluded, the studio fell into a reflective hush, the moderator's wrap-up words echoing faintly amid the lingering applause. Kennedy had sealed the night with his unflinching emphasis on clear, accountable foreign policy, leaving Psaki's counters hanging unresolved. She offered a brief nod as the lights dimmed, her poised demeanor intact, but her influence noticeably diminished in the face of his straightforward logic. The audience, a diverse crowd of onlookers, shifted from passive viewers to engaged participants, murmuring approvals that signaled a broader resonance. Kennedy rose calmly, offering a simple handshake to the moderator before exiting the stage, his presence leaving an indelible mark on the room. The ripple effects were immediate and far-reaching. Social media ignited with fervor clips of Kennedy's key moments, his composed takedown on global strategies, and his call for America First priorities, amassing views by the millions. Hashtags like #KennedyWakeUp and #TruthOverSpin trended nationwide, with users from all walks sharing personal stories, a veteran posting, "Finally, someone asking the real questions about our commitments abroad," and a young professional adding, "His clarity cuts through the fog, makes you think twice about what leadership means." News outlets, even those typically aligned differently, ran analyses praising his approach. Kennedy turned complexity into common sense. One headline read, "While podcasts dissected how his authenticity outshone rehearsed responses." The viral surge wasn't just noise. It sparked real discussions in homes, workplaces, and online forums where people debated the value of transparent dialogue over evasive tactics. Backstage, the atmosphere buzzed with a mix of awe and strategy. Psaki's team convened quickly, releasing a concise statement. A robust exchange that underscores the importance of varied viewpoints. Kennedy, meanwhile, fielded a barrage of messages on his phone. Congratulations from allies, inquiries from media, and notes from everyday folks saying, "You spoke for me tonight." He responded modestly, emphasizing, "It's about keeping the lines open for honest talk." Outside the studio, a small gathering of viewers who'd watched remotely formed, holding impromptu signs like "Voices Matter" and sharing nods of solidarity. It wasn't a protest or celebration. It was a quiet affirmation that one exchange could ignite broader reflection. Yet the true power of the night lay in the lessons it imparted, serving as an educational touchstone for anyone tuning in. At its core, the debate illustrated that genuine expertise stems not solely from credentials, but from a blend of lived experience and willingness to engage openly. Kennedy's references to his Louisiana upbringing highlighted how personal roots can inform broader understanding, teaching us to honor diverse backgrounds rather than discount them, a principle applicable in schools where students learn to appreciate classmates' unique stories, or in teams where varied insights drive innovation. Moreover, the exchange underscored the art of active listening. By addressing Psaki's points directly, without dismissal, Kennedy modeled how respecting opposing views fosters mutual growth, encouraging us to apply this in daily conflicts like family disagreements or community meetings to build bridges instead of walls. Perhaps the most vital takeaway was the courage to participate even when doubted. Kennedy's unflappable response to being called unqualified showed that conviction paired with facts empowers voices often sidelined. This educates us to step into conversations confidently, whether voicing ideas in class, advocating at work, or engaging civically, promoting personal development and collective harmony. Imagine applying these workplaces become collaborative hubs. Neighborhoods solve issues through dialogue, and societies grow more inclusive. It's not about perfection, but progress through respectful exchange. In the end, Kennedy didn't just debate. He inspired a ripple of self-reflection, proving thoughtful participation can transform not just one night, but ongoing narratives. The story extended beyond the stage into lives touched by its call to listen, share, and connect.